welcome back to Pinnacle State Park. We are outside today and I don't know if you can see this stunning view. This is part of my office space. It's amazing. We are just outside the visitor center right over here, and this is our quarry pond. Has some really cool history about it. Come by and visit with me anytime you'd like, and I'll tell you all about our awesome quarry pond and the location that's right behind me. Currently, can't see it from where you guys are, but we've already spotted a turtle and a snake, and so you guys by now should know all about those creatures. So hopefully you've learned a little bit from us. So today, we're gonna talk about something that we don't even have, but it's kind of the theme for the summer, right? So tails on our animals. We don't have one, although they say ancestors of humans might have had a little bit of one, a little nubbing kind of thing. I don't know about all of that. You'll have to research that yourselves. But I do know about some really impressive tails in the animal kingdom. And we're going to talk about what those are and what those guys use those tails for. A lot of different reasons. Some of them are really kind of cool. Some of them are really kind of gross. So we're just going to take a look and see what we can find out about some of those tails in the wild today. One of the first things we're going to talk about as far as tails is kind of structure. So these guys have a little bit of a difference between what those tails look like on the inside. In a lot of cases, what we get is that it's an extension of their spinal column. So you can see this is a turtle's tail, and these are the bones inside there that are a lot like vertebrae. So this extends all the way from their back, down their neck, down their back, and off the tail to continue that. In some cases, that's what most tails do. In other cases, and we'll come up with a couple of those, they don't have any bones in those tails. Maybe it's just feathers. Maybe it's just fur. Maybe it's just other tissues and things like that. So some animals do have these tails that extend from their spinal column all the way down to the tip of their tail, and that's a difference in some of the animals and how they use those tails. So it makes a little bit of a difference. One of the first way these animals can use those tails, most of us have probably seen. So for instance, if you have a domestic cat at home, these guys, when they get ready to jump on maybe the back of your couch, on the countertops where they're not supposed to be, you might notice that their tails kind of come up. That actually helps them to balance as they're walking across those areas. And we have a couple of other animals here in Arkansas that do that, but then there are animals all around the world that do it too. We don't get monkeys in Arkansas, okay? But there are animals that have these long, pretty tails, like a howler monkey here, that they use that to balance when they're on these little fine areas of branches or stuff between trees. So the first thing these guys use those tails for are to balance or counterbalance their body weight. That way they can move, they have a lot of momentum. You'll see squirrels do that with their tails when they're jumping across from tree to tree. All kinds of cool stuff. So balance is the first way these guys use their tails. Another really cool way they use it is actually communicating with each other. So these guys will use those tails to communicate with each other, and sometimes even with us. If you guys have seen our snake program, you'll probably remember this guy. So this is a tail that is specifically designed to communicate its presence. So rattlesnakes in this case have a rattle on their tail, not for calling in prey, not for any other reason than to let you know where they are. These guys don't want you to step on them. They don't want you to hurt them. They don't want you to mess with them. So they make this tail rattle so that you can actually hear where these guys are. So it's kind of a defense. It's kind of a way that they communicate and keep you in touch with what they're doing. Another way that animals communicate with their tails is different positions. If you guys have a dog at home, you've probably seen this exact thing. Here in the park, we get coyotes, like this guy right here. So this is one of our coyote furs. This actually can show you what their tail looks like right there. And they use this just like a dog would. So these guys, when they're happy, have you seen your dogs do this? That's a happy coyote. That's a happy dog. If their tail is down and their fur is kind of straight up on the back of their backs, that's not a happy coyote. So these guys use this tail to communicate their emotional status. Really happy coyote. their emotional status to the other members of their group, or if they're being threatened or something, they'll tuck it. If they're scared, they'll make it move just a little bit down here. They'll straighten it out if they're angry. So that tail communicates between members of the same group or even members of other groups. We also get here in Arkansas, Coyote, stay. This guy right here. Now this one's kind of tricky. Some of you hunters may know what this is. So this is the tail of a white-tailed deer. And this is really kind of an amazing little tail that has just this little bit of white right here on the end of its tail. And the way this works to communicate is that it lets them know in a family group whether that is an okay situation or a scary situation. Most of the time when you see these guys on the road or crossing the highway, that tail is sticking straight up. That is a deer that's telling the rest of his family there is something scary right here close to us. Pay attention. If their tail is down and they're having breakfast and they're enjoying a nice evening alone, they're having a good time by themselves, their tail is down, they're very calm, the rest of the family knows that everything is okay. If something is scary, maybe one deer sees it, they pop that tail up, it's a signal to the rest of the family in his group that there may be something scary to be careful of. So these guys use these communication tails to talk to each other as well as to us. Sometimes the message is a little bit different. Sometimes the message is, hey baby. So in the case of some of those tails, one of the most famous you probably have seen is the peacock's tail. You guys have seen those brightly colored peacock's tail? Technically, peacocks do exist in the wild in North America. I've never seen one here in Arkansas. I don't have any feathers or anything to show you, but it's one that most people are familiar with. But when the boys see a pretty peahen, they flare out that big feather of tail. They kind of show it off. They shake it around and they say, hey, look at me. I'm really, really cute. Wouldn't you like to hang out with me? If she likes him, she will. If not, she walks away and she finds one that she likes a little better. Another species that most of you hunters might recognize does something very similar. And I do have a feather from this one. So if you've seen a great big tom turkey or a boy turkey, you've seen the same kind of behavior. This is a romance message. This is a, hey, look at me, I'm a big, strong male. I would make a great partner for you as a female. So these guys will do the same thing. They'll have a whole series of these that fan out behind them to show how big and attractive they are for the girls. So they use these for romance messages too. Now, we already mentioned one of the defensive tails, which is the rattlesnake, and that's a defensive move. That means that he doesn't want you to mess with him. But there are a few animals that use their tails for other ways to defend themselves as well. So, for instance, you guys have probably seen one of these, at least maybe not this really colorful species, but lizards do something kind of weird when they get a little freaked out. So, if something grabs this guy by the tail, So if something grabs this guy by the tail, this tail will actually pop right off. So very often our skinks, fence lizards, and in this case, this is a collared lizard. These guys, when they get scared or something grabs their tail, they'll actually pop it off. Sometimes they'll even pop it off when nothing is there. And the idea is that that tail keeps wiggling over here by itself. Yeah, it's kind of gross. It kind of wiggles over here and it distracts the predator. That way, maybe they'll eat the tail and the rest of the lizard can just run off on its own. So it's a really good defense tactic. Squirrels don't have a reason to defend themselves too awfully much, but they have a really cool tail to defend themselves from weather. So I love this little thing because squirrel is actually Greek for shade tail. So they use this to kind of use it like an umbrella. So they'll sit in trees when it's raining, when it's cold or something like that, and they'll curl that tail right over their head and use it to protect themselves or defend themselves from the elements outside. I think they're cute. I just love squirrels. They're amazing. I have a whole squirrel day, so you need to come out for squirrel day too. But we have a great little squirrel tail here that shows how they use that tail to defend themselves from the natural elements outside. Then we have some really cool critters that have figured out a way to use their tails as tools. So they can actually use them to do something, or to complete a task, or to kind of to do something with what they need for their home, for instance. And the best case that I can show you, you guys have probably seen it. You might see a group of horses, cattle, something out in a field, and you'll see that tail kind of do this. Just randomly, sitting there for a second, randomly. In case you didn't know, that is an excellent fly swatter. So horses and cattle will use that tail to keep those biting insects off of them, off of their rumps, off of their back end. Imagine if you had one for all the gnats flying around right now. You would want it right here around your face, right? So those tails just flit around. They keep swatting around those flies, mosquitoes, other biting insects, keeps them off the animals. Another animal that uses a tool with its tail is a beaver. It has one of the coolest tails out there. Now this guy is pretty small. These guys can get up to about the height of 2 feet. So up to almost my knees, maybe even a little bit above that. But this tail is an amazing adaptation. They can use it for swimming, but they can also use it to help them build their homes. So these guys will be traveling around along the edges of water, in the banks of the rivers and things like that. They'll actually scoop up a whole bunch of mud. They'll actually create a little mud pit out there specifically for this. So they'll scoop up a bunch of this mud, they'll carry it over to their place where they're building their home or their lodge, and then they plop the mud on top of that. Then they turn around and they take this tail and they pat it down, so that they can actually pack that mud in between all of those sticks and branches and stuff and make that home really solid. In fact, some of these places have actually been proven to be completely water dry on the inside, because these guys can pack that mud so well with this tail to make their home completely secure from the rain and the elements and the cold. And they go under the water, they come up under the lodge, and they have this big open space inside there that keeps them completely protected. So this tail gets used as a shovel or a packing instrument to build that home along the water. It's so good, in fact, that sometimes when they block the water too well, farmers and landowners actually have to go out and blow the dam up because they can't dismantle it any other way. So it's an excellent tool for that kind of thing. So they can also use their tails for attack. And this one you're probably going to be familiar with too, although you may not seen it this close before. So we have a very large wasp that is called a cicada killer. And it's really hard to see, but you might be able to make out that tiny little stinger right there. Let me see if I can get it to show up without actually touching it. So this tail right here is specifically used to attack other animals, or in this case, prey animals. So a cicada killer, guess what it's going to kill? It's going to kill cicadas. And it does this so that it can lay its eggs on the cicada, and then the larvae eat the cicada alive. I know, it's kind of dramatic, but it's also a very large wasp, and it's got a very large stinger right here on the end. But these guys generally go after cicadas. We don't have to worry about them. But that attack tail is specific for them to be able to find their food and to take care of their young. So these guys have a very, very specific snake attacking tail. Another species that has something similar to that, let's see if I could gently pick him up, you may be familiar with, is a scorpion. So you can probably see that tail pretty good right there. So these guys use that tail to go after prey too. This guy actually has a little faked, we put this in his hand to make him look cool. But he does have a little insect in his pincher here, because that's what he uses that tail for. He will use it as a defensive tail, but the scorpion's tail primarily is for him to find food. So he is looking for these little insects, these little critters he can grab with his pinchers. Then he flips that tail around and he stings them with that stinger. That way he can subdue that prey and then eat it at his leisure. He doesn't have to hurry up to do anything. So this actually helps him to find his food and forage for prey that he can eat. It's a really cool tail. I think they're awesome. I just recently rescued one. But I set them free because they can be a little bit irritating. They don't like to be messed with very much. So they can use those tails for attack. They can also use tails to generally move. And in the case of our water creatures, That is a really distinct tail. Now, I can't grab a fish out of the water. You guys don't need to see me kind of handling a live fish, because then I don't want it to get too exhausted or anything like that. So I have this little rubber fish, but it does actually move similar to how fish use their tails. So this tail, in the case of our fish here in Arkansas, moves back and forth to get that forward, occasionally backwards motion, and it goes back and forth like this. However, mammals and other creatures that swim under the water don't have a tail that does this. They need to be able to come up to get air from the surface of the water. So in the case of mammals like whales, dolphins, and other things like that, their tails don't go side to side. Their tails go up and down. So when you see that kind of movement, that is typically a mammal of some sort in the water. Our beaver friends will do that. The platypus in Australia will do that. Dolphins, whales, other things like that generally do that big flapping motion like this versus the tails that fish do back and forth. So that kind of can give you an idea of how to identify stuff. There are some animals that use their tails for a different type of movement. In the case of this bird, you have these absolutely stunning tail feathers right here along the back. And it may not seem like it. It may seem like the most important feathers on the bird are the wings, which give it the lift, but that tail does a lot to help them control the movement. They do a lot of pivoting like you do in a boat. They do a lot of motion that helps them to dive or to help them to lift back up. This tail is really important for them to be able to fly properly. So these feathers are very important for birds to be able to fly the way that they do. And you get cases where, like the falcons, can dive. They'll tuck those, and then at the last moment they spread them out, and that's what helps them to do that diving motion and then come back up quickly. That tail is really important for slowing them just enough to make that curve to come back up. And those guys can fly and plummet very, very quickly. Speaking of one, did you hear him? So movement is a really important thing for these guys to use those tail for. The last one is going to be kind of a little ickier. These guys will also use their tails to help them scent mark some stuff. So if you've ever been to the zoo, I think the Memphis Zoo has an amazing hippopotamus exhibit there. But you might see them walking around on the land and their tails are hanging behind them, and all of a sudden you'll see them spin their tail in a big circle. And as they're doing this, stuff is flying everywhere. That's on purpose, guys. These guys actually take that tail while they're using the bathroom and they spin it around really, really quick. That flings all the stuff that they excrete out into the surface around them, marks their territory, puts their scent everywhere in that enclosure, and makes it kind of weird and gross for us. But they use that to mark territory. They don't have any other way of doing that. They don't have, scent glands or anything like that. So they will fling their poop in all kinds of directions so that it marks where their boundaries and stuff are for their territory. We do have one animal here that doesn't necessarily fling that kind of thing, but he has a very distinctive smell as well. Everybody knows what this guy is. It's immediately recognizable by this color pattern. So these guys do something a little bit different. They have this really distinctive color pattern that you immediately know what this animal does, which gives you a warning already to leave him alone. However, if you don't, these guys have an amazing appendage right back here that helps them to deliver something that scents an entire area very well. These guys can shoot that spray directly underneath their tails, 3 feet high and 6 feet away. So that means a direct spray from basically what is a 6-shooter right beneath this tail that can come and hit you in the face if you're sitting 6 feet away. Not pleasant, not enjoyable, but it is a good way that these guys use this tail to mark an area as someplace they may not want to come back to. So if they have an altercation, let's say with your dog, they will get upset. They will stomp their feet. They will give the dog some ample opportunity to leave it alone. Your dog is really insistent and wants to play with the skunk. The skunk will lift its tail, aim that little gland at them, and shoot that spray. That smell will stick in that environment for a very, very long time. You don't realize it, but this guy has marked that territory as someplace he might not want to come back to because he had a really bad experience. It's like if you go and have food poisoning at a restaurant, are you going to want to go back? Probably not. So the idea is that he uses that scent to not only deter an enemy, but he can also remember, ooh, I had a really bad day here. I really don't want to come back to this area again. So he's marking that entire space to remind himself, this is not someplace I want to hang out. So those are a lot of those different tales that we can see right here in Arkansas within the park system. You can see most of these animals throughout the entire state and sometimes across the country. A few of these you can't, you'll have to kind of look up some. Most of these you can also see good examples of at the Little Rock Zoo if we don't have them here in Arkansas. But I do have one very special question for you guys. Now that we've learned all these cool things about tails for balance and communication and attacks and all that kind of stuff, I have one question that's going to kind of be teasing you for our next segment, okay? I need to know if you guys believe that an opossum can hang from a tree by its tail. What do you think? Let us know.